series of videos from the recent Longford Heritage Office information webinar on upcoming conservation grants in 2021. In this webinar, we were joined by a number of speakers, including myself, Máiréad Ní Chonghaile, Longford Heritage Officer, Nick Sweeney, Architect, who talked about selected grant-aided conservation works in the area, Jane Mead, Architect, who discussed the traditional farm building scheme. We were also joined by former applicants Kieran Cousins of Doreen House, Clondra, alongside Ronan Daly and Charles Lambert of Kilglass House. I will be discussing the Built Heritage Investment Scheme and Historic Structures Fund. These are building repair conservation grants funded by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. They are administered in County Longford by Longford County Council's Heritage Officer. These grants are quite similar in terms of the process and the timetable, however they are different in terms of what is covered and the level of co-funding. Fortunately, none of the grants are 100% funded. This means co-funding or matched funding is required. This is the amount of private funding the applicant has to put into the project themselves. This amount can vary between 50% to 20%. The grant covers the works, materials and certain conservation specialist fees. Some grants can be blended with other public funding. First, we will discuss the Built Heritage Investment Scheme, or the BHIS. For the applicant, this is the most accessible of the two grant schemes. There is €72,000 available for the county as a whole. The grants range from €2,500 up to €15,000. This represents up to 50% of the project works. While every effort is made to support as many projects each year as possible and to give those grant-aided as high a grant as possible, unfortunately not every applicant will be successful. On average, between 7 and 11 projects are supported in County Longford each year. Having said that, you can apply multiple years. To apply for the BHIS are the owners of protected structures or those who have the written permission of the owner. A protected structure is recorded in the Record of Protected Structures, which is part of the County Longford Development Plan. This is available within the planning section of longfordcoco.ie at the web address available on screen. Protected structures includes the building and any structures within its curtilage. For example, agricultural buildings, stables, gatehouses, gates and historic boundaries, unless stated otherwise. In very limited circumstances, those who want to undertake certain works to non-protected structures within architectural conservation areas, such as the Battery Road here in Longford Town or Arda Village, or those within the amenity of a national monument might be eligible. However, we do encourage that you get in contact ahead of time because the availability of this is very limited. Now we'll discuss what type of works you can actually apply for. In short, we're looking to support works that will keep a protected structure weather-tight and upright. For example, works that are essential to stabilise a protected structure or part of the building, installation of specialist monitoring systems, or works to reduce any damage or danger to the building from collapse or partial collapse, or malicious damage, or from fire, weather, vandalism, etc. Looking at it in a little bit more depth, we will start with the roof, and this will include the repair of any roof structures, coverings and features, such as historic dormer windows, traditional skylights, chimney stacks, cupolas, balustrades, etc. So works that are supported would be the recovering with natural slate, dealing with barge boards, flashings, repair to chimney stacks, etc. When we are looking to support a project, we are looking for proposals that use appropriate materials. So natural slate, if it's a thatched cottage, then the thatching material needs to be appropriate to the historic building structure. We encourage the reuse of historic building fabrics where at all possible. Also supported are rainwater goods. They are your gutters, hoppers, downpipes and soakaways. Ideally, these should be repaired or at best replaced with appropriate materials. PVC and very thin profiled aluminium are not appropriate. Moving down to walls, we will support the works to repair external walls and features. So that includes external surfaces, decorative elements, wall coverings and claddings. Also works to remedy defects that could create future damage. So foundation settlement, chimney collapse, fungal attack on timber, or salt migration, which is that type of crystalline appearance that you sometimes see on exterior walls. All of those are covered within the grant. Also works to deal with issues of damp, so dealing with ventilation or introducing ventilation, fixing French drains or lime rendering. Also, urgent repairs to fixtures such as decorative panels, urns, statues, etc. may be considered, though we would look to prioritise serious structural defects such as in the roof and in the walls ahead of decorative features. Moving on to joinery, so this covers repairs to significant elements of external joinery such as windows, doors and associated elements. Where possible, we do ask to retain and repair the historic joinery as much as possible. Replacement with historically accurate replacements is a last resort. We also ask to salvage and reuse historic glass as much as possible, as this is precious handmade material. In certain circumstances, draft proofing works to windows and doors could be considered, as well as, of course, appropriate repair to stained glass windows and door openings. Works that are covered are repair and conservation of internal structures and features. So this includes internal structural elements such as floors, walls, staircases, etc. Also significant historic decorative features, including decorative plasterwork, interior joinery, fittings, decorative elements. Also lath and plaster coverings on the walls. If we're looking at historic industrial buildings and mills, your machinery, water wheels, millstones, etc. are also covered. If your building has interesting early technical and plumbing mechanisms, such as an early heating system, historic lifts or dumbbells, we could actually look to support the repair and maintenance and upgrade of those. Also, under this particular scheme, some energy efficiency works that seek to increase the thermal performance and energy efficiency of the building in line with the relevant advice series guidance may be supported. In this case, however, you must use materials and methods appropriate for an historic building and be specified by a qualified conservation professional. Not all methods are suitable for every building. Some of the works that may be considered would be draft proofing of windows, doors and other openings, attic insulation to pitched roofs, the replacement of outdated services such as radiators with high efficiency units and updated controls, the repair and upgrading of historic window shutters, which are incredibly useful for thermal efficiency, the installation of appropriately detailed secondary glazing being a second window inside your main exterior window, and the insulation of suspended timber floors. Now, of course, there are a number of things that are not covered. Routine maintenance and minor repairs, alterations and improvements that are not required to conserve the building, painting and decorating. Basically, any works not essential for conservation can't be covered. We have a limited amount of resources and we need to prioritise them. Demolition, except in very limited circumstances, and that is for the greater good of the building. The removal of render from a previously rendered exterior and repointing. So this is where you have a stone building that has an exterior render, which is your exterior plasterwork. If you want to remove that, repoint the stonework and leave it exposed, unfortunately that is not covered under the grant. It is generally inappropriate for the building as a whole, and we would prefer to see that it would be covered in an appropriate, breathable, lime-based render. However, if you need to take off old cementitious plaster, that is potentially damaging the fabric of the building and it needs to be left exposed for a period of time to dry out the building. but that it is a first step towards lime rendering for the good of the building as a whole, then that might be considered. But the justification for that should be in a method statement. Also, we have to exclude tanking and waterproof plasters, the installation of damp-proof courses of any type, mechanical, electrical, etc. We do not support that. Double glazing of any type, even if it is the incredibly thin ultralight stuff that is out now, that's not covered. The installation of thermal efficient glass, also not covered, nor is storm glazing. Micro renewables such as mini turbines, also not covered. The fund will also not cover external wall insulation. Now, inside insulation may be considered, but only where no architectural features are impacted. So that is, for example, your any cornices, that you're not going to lose any of a cornice by dry lining, or if it doesn't mean removing of historic joinery. Also, where the breathability, that is how air gets from the exterior to the interior and back out again, where that isn't affected, it can be considered. But again, this is where you need your good quality conservation advice. So what do you need to do to apply? Well, first and foremost, know what works you want to carry out this year. Choose the items that need the most attention and will do the most good, particularly with regard to dealing with your roof, your rainwater goods and drainage. You must have a conservation specialist advising and specifying the works. We really do recommend that you try and get them well ahead of time so that they can properly assess the structure and set out the works that need it and also help cost it. The conservation advisor will supply a method statement. This is essential for the grant. This contains a brief description of the building and sets out the works that you're going to carry out. It'll also list how they will be done, what materials are to be used, and why. Very generic statements such as make good the plasterwork or repair the roof is simply not good enough. We need to have the detail. Also, the method statement should be supplied with the grant application where at all possible. However, if it's not there at the time that the application form is sent in, you must supply it before you commence the work. Otherwise, your grant will be forfeit. The method statement also should come with good quality photographs of the building and the areas to be repaired. They must be well lit and in focus. We need to be able to see what you are photographing. So pay attention to lighting, bring in extra lamps if needs be, but make sure that we can see what you're trying to show us. Your application form will also need to be accompanied by the map showing the location of the building marked out in red. We will also need to know how much the works being proposed will cost. Ideally, this should be a quotation or an estimate. However, a fee proposal from your architect will be sufficient. Where you are not the owner, we will need written permission from the owner to apply for the fund and to undertake the works. If your work requires planning permission, this really should be in place before applying for the funding. It can take longer than anticipated to get your planning permission. If your building has a Section 57 declaration, please include that also, or at least the reference number. Now, a Section 57 declaration is something where the owner or an occupier of a protected structure can apply to the local authority, in our case Longford County Council, for a declaration that sets out which hypothetical works require planning permission in that building and which works do not. They're bespoke to each building because each building is different. This can take a few months to come in, so ideally you'd want to apply this year to have it in place for next year. Your application form must be signed by hand. Now, some other requirements and tips. Please send your application form and all of your accompanying information, as much as you have, well, certainly your photographs, as a PDF and JPEG to heritage@longfordcoco.ie. Include in the address line of your email BHIS 2021 and the name of your building, please. Otherwise, it may go into our spam filter and it may not be seen. Every effort will be made to support as many grants as possible, but unfortunately, not every application may be successful this year. Projects showing the most urgent need will be prioritised, but we will do our best to support as many people as possible. All of the information that you need about what's needed, what can be covered, and also to download the application form is available on the Heritage section on longfordlibrary.ie or at the web address featured on screen. The closing date for the 2021 fund is now the 22nd of February 2021. Now, if you are successful in your grant application, some things to think about when you're undertaking your works. If your application is successful, you must remember that work cannot begin unless exceptional circumstances prevail until after the minister makes their decision. This is likely to be the end of March at the earliest, possibly early April. Your work must be supervised by your conservation specialist, and your works really should be and must be undertaken by a contractor with knowledge and experience of historic building and building practices. We have many really fine contractors in County Longford. However, not all have experience with historic buildings or historic building materials, in particular lime render and lime mortar. So it's important to get somebody who knows what they're doing with regard to historic buildings. Work must begin before the first week of September. We allow up to about the 5th of September to take into account nesting season. So if you need to wait for any hatchlings or bats to leave a roof, for example, there's a little bit of flexibility there. But please try and start the work as soon as you can. The time frame for completing the works is very, very short. You really should be finished by the 8th of October. When it's time to draw down, please send in receipts, photographs and a written request for drawdown. This is just letters stating that you wish to draw down your grant into me by the 15th of October. This date is to give Longford County Council a chance to have the grant checked out, works approved and paid out into your account, ideally by the 31st of October. This date is important because we, as a local authority, must recoup the grant that we pay you from the department the first week of November. If there are any changes to the work that needs to be done, please let me know as soon as possible. Now we will have a look at the Historic Structures Fund 2021. The primary focus of the Historic Structures Fund, or HSF, is on the conservation and enhancement of historic structures and buildings for the broader benefit of communities and the public. It aims to enable larger-scale conservation works to be carried out on heritage structures that are deemed to be significant and in need of urgent support, to encourage the regeneration and reuse of historic properties, and to help secure the preservation of protected structures and/or historic culturally significant assets, to support the investment of private capital in labour-intensive projects to conserve historic structures in public and private ownership for community use, to support employment in the conservation and construction industries, and to build resilience in our heritage properties to enable them to withstand the effects of climate change. In 2021, there are 4 streams to this fund, 2 of which are new limited pilots. Stream 1 features grants from €15,000 up to €50,000, up to a maximum of 80% of the project cost. These are aimed at essential repairs and smaller capital works for the refurbishment and conservation of heritage structures. A maximum of 3 projects in County Longford can be shortlisted in this category. As this is a national competition, there is no guarantee that all, or indeed any, of the shortlisted projects will be funded. Please note that applicants cannot avail of funding under both the Historic Structures Fund and the Built Heritage Investment Scheme in the same year. To be successful in this fund, there are a number of selection criteria that will be looked at. First is the significance of the structure. Second, the efficacy of the grant in achieving the aims of the Historic Structures Fund. Third, the quality of the methodology and the technical merit of the works proposed. And four, the contribution of the proposed works to keeping the structure in use or bringing it back to use. Under Stream 2, there will be a small number of grants awarded from €50,000 up to €200,000, which is aimed at larger enhancement, refurbishment or reuse projects involving heritage structures, where a clear community or public benefit has been demonstrated. In this case, it will be funded up to 50%, although in exceptional circumstances, the applicant can seek for up to 80% funding. There is a potential in this case to fund over 2 years, however, a very clear justification must be given as part of the application process. One project in County Longford can be shortlisted in this category. Again, as before, applicants cannot avail of funding under both the Historic Structures Fund and the Built Heritage Investment Scheme in the same year. The selection criteria for successful grants is very similar to Stream 1, only in this case they will also look at the broader public or community benefit of the project. Moving on to the two pilot schemes. Initially we will have a look at Stream 4, which relates to historic shop fronts. This is quite similar to Stream 1, where grants from €15,000 up to €50,000, representing a maximum of 80% of the project costs, are granted. The purpose of this grant is to incentivise the conservation of historic shop fronts. Eligible essential repairs and small capital works for the refurbishment and conservation of historic shop facades, windows, signage and other associated details will be granted to safeguard them and keep them in use. So this is for the repair of old traditional historic shop fronts, not their replacement or any modern shop fronts. In this case, one project in County Longford can be shortlisted for this stream, and as before, applicants cannot avail of both this fund and the BHIS this year. And the selection criteria for successful grants will be as Stream 1, looking at the significance of the building, the efficacy of the proposed works, the quality of the application and methodology, and the contribution of the proposed works to keeping the structure in use or bringing it back into use. And then finally we come to Stream 3, which is based on vernacular building, which is a new pilot. Vernacular structures are the buildings and similar built features that are informal part of our landscape. They're not designed by architects, engineers, local authorities or anybody like that, but instead they were conceived, built and developed within a community by the people of the community, their families, their friends, their neighbours, using local materials, local techniques and layouts passed down between generations. In Ireland, when we think of vernacular, we're thinking of the small farmhouse, the small town building or building in the village, your country cottage, your thatch cottage. So therefore, it represents a very important part of our tangible cultural heritage. That is, the part of our heritage that we can actually see, touch, interact with. It's also a very important part of our intangible heritage. That is the part of our heritage that we can't see. So that is the knowledge that each generation passed on to the next, especially in terms of skills and the crafts, including thatching, mud walling, wattle working, traditional masonry and traditional carpentry. So it's this really important connection between ourselves and our ancestors and the way that they lived and adapted and used their environment. So under this particular stream, they aim to support the conservation, repairs and small capital works to vernacular structures that are not protected structures. They're not listed in the Record of Protected Structures, which is at the back of the County Development Plan, The full grant nationally is €50,000 and the grant amounts will be between €5,000 and €10,000. So in reality, only between 5 and 10 buildings will be funded as a whole in Ireland. The grant will represent a maximum of 80% of the project cost. And as again, applicants can't avail of the funding under both the Historic Structures Fund and the Built Heritage Investment Scheme in the same year. Now, tips on applying and things to remember for all streams. Download the application form from the Longford Library website and also the circular. This is very important and it gives all of the information that the department are looking for. Be sure to fill it out carefully and thoroughly to give as much information as possible within the confines of what they ask. Now, one thing to remember about this particular grant is that all grants are likely to be above €10,000. Therefore, you must be tax compliant. Longford County Council cannot pay out on grants of more than €10,000 without having a tax clearance cert or tax compliance by accessing a tax access code. So apply to the Revenue Commissioners for this as soon as you can. This can delay payment in October. In this case, the works must be specified and overseen by your conservation specialist. They will supply a method statement which contains a brief description of the buildings, its history, its significance, and also describing what needs repair. It will set out the works that are to be done, how they will be done, what materials are to be used, and why. The method statement will come with good quality photographs of the building and the area to be repaired. As before, they must be well lit and in focus. Also supply a map with the location of the building marked out in red. In this case, we will need costings, as the grant is a portion of the project cost. If you are not the owner, written permission of the owner to apply for the grant and undertaking the works is necessary. If the project requires planning permission, this really should be in place before you apply. Also, if the building has a Section 57 declaration applied for from Longford County Council that sets out hypothetical works that would require planning permission and which works would not, this should be included, or at least the reference number. It is important to have these elements in place, as if they are missing, we are unlikely to be able to shortlist it. And if it is shortlisted, it may not be successful in achieving the grant. So please send your completed and signed application form along with all of the accompanying information as set out in the circular to heritage@longfordcoco.ie. Please include words HSF 2021 and the name of your building in the email subject line, otherwise it may not be seen or incorrectly assessed. Every application will be assessed on its own merits. However, a number of applications that can be shortlisted is very limited. So the better quality an application is made, the more likely it is to be supported. All of the information and application forms are available from longfordlibrary.ie at the web address listed on the screen now. The closing date for applications this year is Monday the 22nd of February 2021. Should your application be successful, these are a number of things to keep in mind. Work cannot begin until after the Minister makes their decision, which is likely to be the end of March or early April at the earliest. Your works must be supervised by a conservation specialist and undertaken by a contractor with historic building experience. Work must begin before the first week of September, as the time frame for completing works is very short. Really, we do want to see the works completed before the 8th of October. Any changes to the work plan or to the methodology must be approved in writing by the department before that element of work commences. We do need to provide updates to the department, and we will be in contact with the information that we need at that time. In order to draw down the funding, please forward receipts, photographs, work reports, etc., as well as a written request for the drawdown into me by the 15th of October. This is to give me a chance to have the grant paid out into your account, ideally by the 31st of October, allowing Longford County Council to recoup the grant from the department the first week of November. So all that's left for me to do is thank you for your time. I hope this was all of benefit, and to wish you the very best of luck in your funding applications this year.